My name is Noan Wexley, and for most of my 78 years, I've been a man of routine and reason. A retired history teacher, widower of 12 years, and father to one, Harry, my life had slowed to a familiar rhythm. That rhythm shattered on a Tuesday afternoon when my son and his wife, Sophie, dropped by unannounced. Harry never visits without calling. The moment I saw his sleek silver car outside, my stomach tightened. Sophie stepped out first, dressed to impress in heels too high for the cracked walkway, her face frozen in a smile too bright to be sincere. Harry followed, wearing the expression of someone who had rehearsed what he was about to say. "Dad," he said as soon as I opened the door, "we need to talk." I let them in, already sensing the cold edge behind their courtesy. They sat on the living room sofa, scanning the house like it was a museum. Sophie crossed her legs, clasped her hands, and got straight to it. "We think it's time to discuss your estate," she said. No small talk. No asking how I was. Harry jumped in. "It's not like you're going anywhere soon, but it just makes sense to get ahead of things," Sophie added smoothly. "We're trying to build a future, and frankly, we're held back because your assets are just sitting there." My eyes narrowed. "You mean my house, my savings, my life's work?" Harry shifted uncomfortably. "Look, you've always said you wanted to leave it all to me. We're just asking, why wait?" "Because I'm not dead," I said flatly. "Dad," Sophie's voice was sugary and sharp, "this isn't about death. It's about helping the next generation. Frankly, you're an obstacle right now." That word, obstacle, like I was a piece of furniture in their way. I stood up slowly, the cane supporting me more out of anger than frailty. "Get out," I said. Harry looked stunned. "Dad, don't be like this." "Out," I repeated louder. "If I'm such a burden to your future, then you don't need to be part of mine." Sophie stood, clearly offended. Harry hesitated, then followed her to the door. "This isn't over," he muttered. "No," I replied, closing the door behind them. "It's just begun." I stood alone in the quiet, trembling not with weakness, but fury. My own son wanted to carve up my life before I'd even drawn my last breath. And Sophie? She saw me as a problem to be solved. Well, I had no intention of being solved. It was time to ACT.M. Why studies smelled of aged paper, pine polish, and memories too dense to escape. It hadn't changed in a decade. The same heavy desk Marie had chosen, the same leather-bound volumes on the shelves, the same soft ticking from the clock she'd insisted we buy on our 30th anniversary. Everything was still hers, still ours. I opened the drawer where I kept her letters. Marie had been a relentless letter writer. Even when we lived under the same roof, she'd slip notes under my tea mug, in my coat pocket, or on my pillow. But the real letters came when she traveled for work, when Harry was little. Back then, he cried every night for his mother, and I, terrified and unsure, read her letters out loud to calm him, pretending she was right there with us. I unfolded one now, dated June 12th, 1989. "Noan, I know you mean well by giving Harry everything, but be careful not to make life too easy for him. Children learn more from effort than comfort. If we cushion every fall, he'll never learn to stand." I exhaled slowly. She had seen it. Even then. Marie was gone 12 years now, yet her voice filled the room, wiser than mine ever was. I had paid for Harry's college, then for the down payment on his first house, then bailed him out when the startup failed. I funded his ambitions, covered his mistakes, swallowed my doubts every time he came back asking for more. What had it taught him? That love was money. That entitlement was inheritance. I stared at the ink now fading on the paper, and something in me shifted. Guilt gave way to something sturdier, conviction. Marie had warned me. I hadn't listened then. I would now. I reached for the landline and dialed the number I hadn't used in over a year. It rang twice. "Noan?" a gruff voice answered. "It's been a while." "Too long, Ron," I said. "I need a favor." "Legal." There was a pause. "You're not dying, are you?" "No," I said grimly. "But my son is already dividing up my grave." Ron chuckled without humor. "Well then, tell me everything. From the beginning." And I did. Every word. When I hung up, we had a plan. "Marie, wherever you are, I heard you. It's time to fight." The steakhouse smelled of charred meat, cigar smoke, and old money, just the way Ron liked it. We met there once a year for 2 decades, always in the same booth, near the back, under a dim copper lamp that cast long shadows on the tablecloth. This time, the shadows felt heavier. Ron was already there when I arrived, a thick folder beside his drink, his tie loosened, but his eyes sharp as ever. Known. He stood and pulled me into a brief, firm hug. You look like hell. I feel like a man whose only son tried to evict him from his own life, I said, sliding into the booth. He grunted. Then we better fix that. Dinner came fast. Ron never wasted time with menus. Filet mignon, medium rare, for both of us. Food sharpens the mind, he used to say when we taught at the university. Tonight, we needed every ounce of clarity. First thing, Ron said, cutting into a steak, you need to consult an estate attorney. Not just some generalist. Someone sharp. Someone mean. You don't just need a will, you need a fortress. I'm not dead yet, I muttered. Exactly. So act like a man who's alive and intends to stay that way. He wiped his mouth. Start gathering documents. Financial records, property deeds, insurance policies. Anything they could twist against you. I've kept everything, I said. Marie made me. You remember how she was. Bless that woman, he said quietly. She had more foresight than either of us. I nodded, then added, I think Harry's planning something bigger. He's not just greedy. He's desperate. Ron frowned, then moved fast. Desperate people are dangerous. After dinner, I lingered at the bar while Ron went to fetch his car. The bourbon was smooth, but my thoughts were rough. That's when I noticed him, mid-30s, business casual, nursing a club soda. He clearly wasn't drinking. He wasn't trying to blend in. Just sitting there, glancing too often in my direction. Our eyes met. He looked away, too fast. I turned back to my drink, pulse ticking faster. I didn't know who he was, but I knew what he meant. I was being watched. The game had changed. The stakes had risen. And I was no longer just a father fighting disappointment. I was a man defending his legacy. Michel Laurent wasn't just a private detective. He was the man you called when you needed the truth scraped from the shadows. I hadn't seen him in over a decade, not since a messy dispute over a colleague's will. But when I phoned, he didn't ask why. He simply said, my office. Noon. Come alone. His office sat above an old bakery, the smell of yeast and sugar mixing oddly with the stale air of bureaucracy. Michel looked exactly the same, thin as a blade, dressed in a gray suit that somehow made him seem both forgettable and terrifying. Known, he greeted, clasping my hand. You're late. I'm old. He smiled faintly. Then let's not waste your remaining minutes. We sat. He opened a black folder and began to slide out documents, one by one, like knives on a table. Your son, Michel said, is broke. He handed me a bank statement, overdrawn accounts, maxed out credit cards, and business loans gone into default. He's leveraged everything to keep a facade alive. Next came records of Sophie's spending. Designer clothes, high-end salons, international vacations booked and then canceled at the last minute, likely for show. She's the mirror, Michel said. Harry's the mask. Together, they're trying to buy a life they can't afford. He handed me one last piece of paper, unfolded carefully from an envelope. It was a note. Sophie's handwriting. Talk to the notary again. If we can prove he's unstable, we can file for conservatorship. He won't resist long. Use his memory lapses. The fall. The slurring. Make it look worse than it is. Once we control the estate, we sell fast. I stared at it. Cold. Precise. Not a moment of hesitation in those words. They've been planning this for months, Michel said quietly. Your refusal only accelerated the timeline. I gathered the documents carefully. These weren't just papers, they were ammunition. The beginnings of a defense. No, of a counterattack. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid. I felt engaged. Alive. Rival, not victim. I returned home just past dusk, adrenaline still running through my veins. The house felt quiet, but too quiet. I turned on the lights, checked the doors, and placed Michel's folder in my safe. Then I heard it. A creak upstairs. Not the usual groan of the old house, but deliberate like a footstep. I stood still, holding my breath. Another sound. A soft click. A door closing, maybe. I reached for my cane, heart pounding. Whatever game they'd started, it had just crossed my threshold. The cafe on Oak Street was my war room now. I chose it for its anonymity, nondescript walls, weak coffee, and regulars who didn't ask questions. I sat at the corner table with my typewriter-quiet laptop, a manila envelope beside my cup, sealed and addressed with meticulous care. Inside were copies of the documents Michelle had given me, evidence of Harry's offshore account, Sophie's luxury purchases, assets hidden behind shell companies, and most importantly, proof of their insolvency. While they cried poor, they were hiding wealth. The envelope would go to each of Harry's creditors. Every bank, every lender. No return address. No name. Just cold, hard facts. I stood, paid in cash, and walked to the nearest mailbox. As I slid the envelope inside, I felt no hesitation. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. By mid-afternoon, I was parked across from Harry and Sophie's house, behind a tinted windshield. They were in the driveway, arguing. Even from a distance, I saw the tension. Sophie waving her arms, Harry pacing, red in the face. She pointed to her phone, then shoved it into his chest. He looked like a drowning man refusing to admit the water was rising. Their little empire was cracking. I watched as she turned and stormed into the house. Harry remained on the porch, head in his hands. That's when I knew I could win. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Their pride wouldn't let them surrender. That evening, I returned home to find an envelope on my porch. No stamp, no mail mark. Hand-delivered. It was a letter from Harry. Dad, it began, I've been thinking. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Let's put the past behind us. Sophie, and I would love to have you over for dinner. Just a meal. No lawyers. No pressure. Just a chance to reconcile. Let me know when you're free. No signature. Just his name typed at the bottom like a business memo. Reconcile? I read it again. It wasn't an olive branch. It was bait. They knew something was slipping from their grasp. This was them trying to regain control, to draw me in unguarded. A trap. I folded the letter, set it on the desk beside Michelle's folder, and smiled for the first time all day. If it was a trap, they'd better be ready. Because I was walking in with eyes wide open, the invitation said family dinner. The setting was anything but. A sterile conference room in a downtown legal firm. Mahogany table, high-backed chairs, water glasses aligned like soldiers. Harry stood by the window when I entered, arms crossed, jaw tight. Sophie was already seated, her posture regal, a pen in her hand before I even sat down. Two men in suits stood behind them. Notaries or lawyers pretending not to be. Dad, Harry said, we just want to make sure everything's in order. For everyone's peace of mind. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out a chair, set down my briefcase, and placed my own papers on the table with calm precision. That's why I brought someone too, I said. The door opened behind me. Enter Malcolm Stern. The documents were slid across the table toward me. A draft of your new will, one of the men explained. Just some small updates for clarity. Malcolm lifted the papers, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. The room was quiet, save for the soft flipping of pages and the tapping of Sophie's fingernails on the table. After 5 minutes, Malcolm looked up. This document is invalid, he said calmly. What? Sophie blinked. It was drafted under duress, Malcolm said. You've attempted to isolate my client, apply psychological pressure, and prepare a document that falsely claims voluntary consent. Furthermore, he turned a page. You've included clauses that violate fiduciary duty laws, not to mention the concealment of financial interest and existing debts. Harry went pale. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice cracking. Oh, I think you do, Malcolm said, producing a second folder, evidence Michelle had gathered. He slid it across the table. Accounts, loans, correspondence, fraudulent statements. We have it all. Sophie leaned forward, reading quickly. Her face dropped. Malcolm stood. Consider yourselves advised, he said, and warned. The room was silent. As we turned to leave, Malcolm leaned toward me and whispered, there's a loophole in their claim. Hidden in the property deed. They don't expect this. I said nothing, but a quiet surge of strength coursed through me. Outside, the autumn wind felt warmer, the sky clearer. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was defending the walls. I was preparing to advance. She came in the early afternoon, unannounced. Sophie stood on my porch, hair perfectly styled, a cashmere coat draped over her shoulders like armor. She held a pie in one hand, store-bought, wrapped in plastic, and a carefully arranged smile in the other. "I thought we could talk," she said sweetly. I stepped aside, letting her in. The bait had arrived. "I want to apologize," she began. Things got tense. "But none of us want this to become ugly." "Ugly?" I asked, tilting my head like an old man confused. "You mean lawyers and such?" She laughed softly. "Exactly. We're family known. You've always been generous. We just want what's best for everyone." She looked around the house as if rehearsing ownership. "This place is beautiful." I told Harry, once things are settled, we could renovate. Open up the kitchen, maybe tear down that wall. You know, make it suitable for our future. The slip was deliberate. Or perhaps arrogant. "Our future?" I asked, letting the question hang in the air. She caught herself, but only slightly. "I meant Harry's future. Ours, of course. But you'd still be part of it. Just in a simpler way." There it was, the facade cracking at the edges. I let my shoulders sag slightly, added a touch of weariness to my voice. "It's just so much to think about. I'm not sure I have the energy anymore." Sophie's eyes lit up. That was the signal she was waiting for. Weakness. Hesitation. The scent of surrender. "You don't have to worry about anything," she said, leaning forward. "Just trust us. Sign what needs signing. Enjoy peace in your final years. That's all we want for you. Truly." I nodded slowly, masking the sharp alertness in my gut. Every word, every pause, every manipulative brush of sympathy was recorded. The device was tucked neatly behind the flower vase on the mantel. She never even looked for it. After she left, the pie still untouched on the counter, I called Malcolm. "She took the bait," I said, "and she thinks I'm ready to fold." There was a long pause on the other end. "Good," Malcolm said. "Then let's let them set the board while we choose the game." At 8:12 a.m., I made the call. "Stillwater Towing and Collections," a voice answered. "I have a vehicle for repossession," I said. "Black Audi. License plate 4XK, 713. Registered to a Mr. Harry Wexley. I believe it's on your delinquent accounts list." The silence on the other end told me everything. The debt was real. The paperwork had been waiting for one final tip-off. "Got it," the voice said. "We'll have a unit out in the next 30 minutes. I hung up and returned to the window, sipping coffee as the autumn sun rose through the trees. The car would be gone before Harry even realized it. One more domino in the slow, deliberate collapse of his carefully curated life. By noon, I was back at Malcolm's office, seated across from him as he sketched out the final phase. "We don't destroy him," I said. "We let him destroy himself." Malcolm nodded slowly. Provocation. Exposure. No direct strike. Just the right pressures at the right time. "And Sophie?" He glanced down at the notes we'd compiled. Every lie, every expense hidden, every image recovered. "We won't need to push hard," he said. "She built her life on glass. It only takes a stone." We arranged the last of the files. The final meeting with Harry and Sophie was scheduled for tomorrow morning. "This ends with them desperate," I said. And desperate people are predictable. That night, the internet began to whisper. It started on a fringe blog, then a comment thread. By morning, it had moved to local forums, business pages, and even the private Facebook group for the Stillwater Country Club. Photos emerged Sophie at a hotel in Zurich with a man who wasn't my son. Screenshots of messages, claims of falsified charity work, doctored tax filings. A letter supposedly from a disgruntled former friend claiming Sophie paid her way into several elite events. The signature? Forged. The story? Plausible. It wasn't truth, but it was close enough to feel true. By 9 a.m., her curated image as a poised socialite was in shambles. The comments were merciless. At 10 a.m., I received a message from an unknown number. "What did you do?" "I didn't answer." I simply looked at the clock and straightened my tie. Because tomorrow morning, the Trop would close. And this time, I'd be the one holding the pen. The conference room was colder than usual. Maybe it was the fluorescent lighting, or maybe it was the tension, the way Sophie sat rigid, lips pale, and Harry avoided eye contact altogether. The documents were already on the table, the same ones they'd tried to dress in legal language and charm. A will revised to suit their greed. A declaration of mental decline. Guardianship requests drafted in advance like eulogies for a man who hadn't died. I sat, calm and composed, and placed one item on the table, a flash drive. "You forgot something," I said. Sophie's lips twitched. Harry shifted in his chair. Just then, the door opened. The man who entered wasn't my lawyer. He wore a plain suit, held a badge, and introduced himself with quiet authority. "Agent Lorne," he said, placing a folder down beside their documents. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The silence in the room cracked like ice. "You're joking," Harry muttered. "No," I said, folding my hands. "I asked an old friend for help. One with access." Agent Lorne opened the folder. Inside, pages of falsified financial statements, fraudulent signatures, forged medical records submitted as part of the guardianship application. "This one," he said, holding up a photocopy, "claims Mr. Wexley was diagnosed with early-stage dementia by a physician who, it turns out, never existed." Sophie's mouth fell open. "That wasn't us, wasn't it?" Agent Lorne asked dryly. "Because the digital trail says otherwise. VPNs were used, but sloppily. The trail leads to a private laptop registered to a Mrs. Sophie Wexley." Harry turned to her, horrified. "You said you covered, I didn't." "He's bluffing." Agent Lorne laid out the evidence like a dealer laying cards. Emails, metadata, transfer logs. It was all there. The room spun into chaos. Sophie stood, shouting denials. Harry began pleading. "Dad," he said, voice cracking, "we were scared, okay? Things got out of hand. We didn't mean, just, let's talk about this." I stood. There's nothing left to say. Sophie rushed toward me. "We're family. Please don't ruin us." I stepped back unmoved. "You ruined yourselves." Harry reached across the table, desperate. "Dad, mercy." "No," I said, my voice calm and final. "You had my love. You buried it under greed." I turned to Agent Lorne. "You have what you need." He nodded. "We'll be in touch." And with that, I walked out. No farewell. No second glance. Outside, the sky had cleared. The air was sharp and bright. Each step I took felt lighter than the last. After everything they'd tried to take from me, I still had the one thing they never understood, dignity. And they had none left. They came in the morning, no longer dressed in luxury, but in humility. Harry's coat was wrinkled. Sophie wore no makeup, her eyes red-rimmed. They stood on my porch like shadows of the people who once tried to steal everything from me. "Dad," Harry began, "we're sorry. We were wrong. About everything." Sophie nodded, eyes downcast. "We lost everything. The house, the car. Our accounts are frozen. People won't even take our calls. I let the silence sit between us. Let them hear it. I don't hate you," I said finally, "but I don't trust you. And I no longer owe you forgiveness." Harry's shoulders slumped. Sophie swayed slightly, like she might faint from the weight of her own shame. "You taught me something," I continued. "Actions have consequences. It's time you learned the same lesson." I handed them nothing. Not comfort. Not money. Not the illusion that everything would be fine just because they said sorry. They left without protest. That, at least, was new. That afternoon, I met Malcolm at his office. We signed the final documents together, every account, every property, everything I once thought I'd leave to my only son now going to a national children's charity. Scholarships, housing, food, books, things that build futures instead of destroying them. As I signed the last page, I felt no anger, just peace. That evening, Malcolm arrived at my door, holding a bottle of red and 2 glasses. "Still think you want to die surrounded by lawyers?" he asked. "God, no," I said, smiling. "I want to die surrounded by quiet, with nothing left to defend." We toasted in the living room. To survival. To truth. to starting over. Not revenge. Freedom. The final kind.